Thanks for spending the time to chat with me.
Hi, Amar. How are you?
I'm okay. We're living in a bit of a dumpster fire, but
Hmm.
I have my energy and I have my community.
Same, same.
So, for those who may not be familiar with your work, can you tell me about just how you got interested in media and what's motivated you since?
Wow. I was always interested in storytelling and in film, really. My background is in documentary film. I was a light theater kid, always loved musical theater. So ever since like high school, ever since I was a young child, actually around 5 years old, I was telling my parents that I was going to be telling stories. I was telling my parents that I was going to be in Hollywood. I was, this is something that is a part of me, and I think really taps into um, the creator in me, like the idea that I can extract something from my mind and create a story, and it can take on a life form and it can multiply into so many different things. Like that is what I've always been interested in, and that's what still excites me to this day.
And as I recall, you went to Northwestern,
Yes.
and you did journalism there, correct?
No, I got a degree from the School of Communications in radio, TV, film.
You're
So I
yes.
went there with the intention to make films. Yes.
And you have made films.
And I have made films. So I went from Northwestern to internship programs at Cartimquin Films here in Chicago. And I worked at a film production house in Milwaukee called 371 Productions, where I worked and did documentary producing and directing for about 3 years before I decided to leave and create the tribe.
So yes, I mean we could talk a lot about the documentaries that you've made because they're beautiful and all very different. But I am interested in what you're wearing right now, the tribe. And can you tell me about like your guiding vision behind the tribe, and what motivated you to start that?
Yeah, the guiding vision has definitely evolved over time. A part of starting the tribe was a little bit of survival. I was watching my best friend, Tiffany Walden, really struggle in her field of journalism after she had gotten 2 degrees from the School of Medill, which is supposed to be like the best journalism school in the country. So she was struggling with finding work. She was struggling with the beats that she was covering, breaking news, a lot of trauma. It was affecting her mental health. And I was like, girl, this isn't why you got into journalism to do work like this. She wanted to tell stories about Black people. She was supposed to be a culture magazine writer. And I was at a point where I wanted to make a shift in my career as well, where I just didn't want to have a boss. And I was like, why don't you come back to Chicago and we figure this out? We work something out to where we're both doing our passions. And, easier said than done. We came to Chicago and we were freelancing with various publications around Chicago. Um, and whenever Tiffany would get a freelancing gig, she would kind of pitch that I come along and do visuals. And so we did some storytelling together. But she was having such a issue pitching Black stories to these mainstream publications. And we started to have more conversations about like, who are your editors? Are they from Chicago? Are they all white men? Do they even understand why this story is important? And a lot of times they didn't understand why the stories were important. And that's when I realized that, like, I think we have an insight and connection to the community that a lot of these publications do not. And I think there's a need for an outlet to fill in the gaps of Ebony magazine that had left Chicago and carry that torch. So we initially thought we were going to be like an Ebony magazine, a vibe, digital version of those things, telling cultural stories and highlighting the multifaceted essence of Black Chicago as a form of resistance to mainstream narratives about who Black Chicago is, which was like such this depiction of so-called Black on Black crime at the time. And so we were like, what can we build that can show the world that we are more than this? What can we build to reclaim that narrative? And that's where our mission of Reshape the Narrative came about. And that's where the name, The Tribe, came about because we always wanted it to be more than journalism, but about building community as well.
Yeah, I love this origin story. It's a really unique one of like Tiffany, who I do think of more as like a print traditional kind of journalist, and you, I think of as a storyteller. I mean, we've talked about even like fiction narratives that you want to create. And so I see in the tribe that blending of culture and information and the idea that people want information in a package that is culturally specific, that like has a vibe, even if it is also based on like facts as well, right? And so, I mean, we don't want to talk, so this is really about social media and tech, but I do want to talk a little bit about how at the tribe you do that. Like you give artists the platforms to interview politicians, right? And talk about political issues, right? Like you really do try to blend that. And it seems like the vision is a little bit like journalism with a perspective.
Absolutely. And this editorial philosophy didn't come without tension. I mean, again, Tiffany had 2 degrees from the Medill School of Journalism, which is like the journalism standard that teaches you about objectivity and that you're supposed to strip yourself of your identity when you go out and report the news. And me coming from the tradition of film tells you the complete opposite, that you are an artist, you have a point of view, you have something to say, and that's the whole reason why you're making something in the first place. So Tiffany and I were battling it out in terms of like what is our editorial philosophy. And I was telling her, like, the thing that's wrong with journalism is that it's dishonest. It tells audiences that you're objective when there's no way to divorce your lived experiences from the work that you create. I mean, the things that inform our work is our cultural identity, our experience as Black women, as people who have relationships to the community here. That also informs like the access that we have to the community. Like people give us tips and stories because they know us, because they trust us. So of course, the stories that we choose are going to be different than an editor who is a transplant and who isn't as rooted here. So yeah, I say all the time, objectivity is a myth, and how we try to tackle journalism is through transparency. That's why we have our newsletter now, Reshape, that is telling people like, hey, this is why we're covering a story in this way. So people know that we did go into a story with intention, and that intention informed the subjects that we chose to interview, the questions that we chose to ask. All of it is intentional. Everything is a choice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had my little stint now almost 20 years ago in newspaper journalism, and I remember pitching editors stories and then just kind of telling me like, I don't think that really matters. I don't think that's really a story. And they wouldn't even really give an answer, but I was supposed to trust them as objective, and they never shared my identities. And when I would finally like win out and like wear them down, oftentimes those would be my best stories, the most popular stories, the ones that they did want to run on the front page of the local section of the paper. And so I totally agree that like this idea of objectivity is totally a myth. And I think that is your superpower, right? Like you're just like, we're going to be honest with you as Black people that this is how we think about this. And you can make up your own mind, right? Which is like what people do anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that perspective, it seems to me, really works well on social media because social media is about authenticity and perspective. So I want to shift gears a little bit. And before we get to the tribe on social media, just talk a little bit about you on social media and just as a millennial, when did you realize that social media had this power to share stories?
Um, I have to say, I wasn't quite sold on social media at first. It's as a water sign, as an empath, it has a really big effect on my mental health. So whenever I do speak and things start multiplying and something goes viral, it's just like, oh my gosh, all these people can see this. I only meant to talk to my friends. But we started to see pretty early on in the tribe's journey that social media could help elevate what we were doing because of the way that we can access public officials um, who may not have been responding to us because, we're not a real publication at the time. But all of a sudden now we can just tag them. We can like put everything on blast publicly, and that will attract everyone's attention and kind of force them to see us. So very early on, we started using social media as a tool and as a feedback engine because we can have conversations directly with our audience, and feel them out and see if we're using language that makes sense, that's really reaching people. But I think in the beginning, we were using social media mostly as a tool of critique of mainstream media. So we were not only were we saying that the tribe is here and here's our story, can you please read it? We were saying, hey, look at this article over here. This is anti-Black. And we want y'all to deal with it in these ways, and like getting the community involved in a conversation about the critique of journalism. Um, so yeah, while there's a lot of different responses and reactions to us using social media in that way, um, I'm sure a lot of people were like, "Who are these people, and who do they think they are?" you know. Um, but we were unapologetic about it. This was 2017. This was Trump's first term. So the tribe was founded, I think, a part of this like wave of the movement for Black lives, and a lot of Black organizations being founded around that time. And us feeling like we needed to be loud because we had a public figure who was saying disparaging things about specifically Black Chicago, saying that he was going to send the he was talking to the top gang thugs of Chicago. He was going to send the feds. So we were using it as a tool of activism to say, oh, no, you're not. One of our most viral tweets that we did in those early days was like, I think we retweeted a politician or something and said, never forget that Trump got ran out of Chicago. So that's kind of like the energy we were on in the beginning, and we were just coming in hot.
Yeah, I mean, but he was too. It was always remarkable to me how many times he had Chicago in his mouth. And it mirrored, like you said, that narrative of Black Chicago that I hear whenever I say that I live in Chicago, not from Chicago, but I've lived here for over 10 years. Outside of Chicago, people be like, oh, it's so violent or whatever. And I'm like, have you even ever been here? Have you even ever been to a Black neighborhood? There's so many beautiful things about Chicago. There's so many incredible things that Black Chicago has given to the United States and to culture for like over 100 years. As you already know, I don't have to tell you that and telling the audience that. And so I think that your ability to speak back through social media really did matter at that time because it wasn't something that mainstream Chicago press was doing because they also perpetuate that narrative. I mean, that's partially where that narrative like comes from, right? Is like the way that they cover Black Chicago.
I would argue that it didn't start with the national press. It started with the local press, actually, because the national press, they get their narratives from the local press. They're not here on the ground. So there were so many local outlets who kind of leaned into this violence narrative, and every week, every weekend was putting out headlines about the gun violence tally. And we started to really develop a philosophy around decriminalizing the news and what that looks like. And that took years to develop.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like social media both supported your production tactics in terms of like giving you access to sources so you could write stories, as well as your kind of engagement, reception, like community engagement as well. So it kind of supported like both arms of what, every publication does, which is like collect information and stories and distribute it to people. I'm curious though, how was it not serving your work? What were the challenges that you have been and were facing on social media that maybe was making it harder to do what you wanted to do or harder to fulfill your mission?
Social media has the ability to really take up a lot of your time and require you to kind of always be trying to figure it out. So, in terms of just like the work that goes into it, the time investment that has to go into it, um, I think that's been really tiresome and detrimental to our ability to actually do reporting and create. Um, I had to really tell my team, like, look, we can't keep up with the trending topics. We got to be outside. You know, we have to be connecting with people. And you do know how hard it is to tell journalists that they don't have to be in every conversation that's happening online. You know, that's really, really difficult philosophically to get through to a newsroom. Um, because it makes us feel like we're behind or something. You know, it's like, okay, so and so put this story out, and we all have access to that story immediately. And now all of a sudden, instead of trying to tell the best story, we're trying to compete with news outlets that are local, national, international. Um, it can really cloud just your mission. So we had to just culturally really work against that, um, work against the 24-hour newsroom culture that social media kind of puts a jetpack into. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that as soon as we figured out the algorithm, as soon as we get good engagement, as soon as we're having great conversations with people, somebody in the back of the tech universe, they change it. Like they change it. And we would actually have conversations with representatives from Facebook. This is before Facebook was Meta. We would have conversations with these people. We would have trouble getting verified. So we'd have to have conversations with them about getting verified. We'd have to have conversations with them about the algorithm and say, like, hey, this Facebook used to be useful for us. We used to get a lot of click through traffic. And then all of a sudden it went to zero. And I'm not exaggerating. It would go from thousands to like zero. Nobody has seen this post. And they would say, oh, we didn't do anything. And it would just be like gaslighting. And so we still, this, it's been years now that we don't know what to do with Facebook because it's like people don't click on the stories there anymore. We imagine that if we were doing live video on Facebook, that would do better. But, you know, these tech companies try to update themselves and merge into whatever platform is popular. So we have all the Meta products trying to be TikTok right now when we've developed an editorial strategy for what they were. So now we have to revamp all of our social media workflows to fit whatever they are evolving to do. And that is like, whew, it's so much work. It's so much work. And to the point where we've, you know, we got off of the X and moved to Blue Sky. And we're doing less work on Blue Sky and getting more engagement. So we know that it wasn't us. On X, we had to post every hour. On Blue Sky, we post like 3 times a day. And we get more engagement, more click-through traffic. So it's hard to develop workflows when they're not necessarily based on what you do, but they're based on what the tech company is doing and prioritizing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're a distributor using another distributor, but you don't
Yeah,
control the mechanism of distribution, really. And that mechanism of distribution is not necessarily designed to support organizations like yours.
absolutely.
Right? It's for celebrities and slop and, misinformation and division and extreme content, generally speaking. And so I really love how you started the answer to that question with just like your care for your staff first and having like a care-centered practice as a distributor sounds like exactly what these platforms don't do. And I know your struggle because OTV started around the same time and we were getting great engagement in 2017. And then all of a sudden, I think Facebook had decided they wanted to do their own video business. So our links to our Vimeo were getting throttled. And then it became just links to any other site, Facebook throttled. Twitter was never useful for us. We were always fighting algorithms. And it, like you said, was a constant battle that was very draining on staff. And so I
Hmm.
love this like divestment that you did. I mean, we pulled off of both of those as well. You're just like, no, I'm not going to play this game. It's a losing game. Um, but I love that you've also found an alternative in Blue Sky. Do you know what it is that makes Blue Sky work for you? And I know it's super new.
Yeah, it's super new. And I'm like, Tiffany would be a better person to talk about maybe like the back end of Blue Sky, but it's not owned to my understanding is that it's not owned by any one person. It's kind of like this open source platform where people can go in and kind of build structures and threads of like how they want content to be viewed. So there is kind of like a structure, like a black sky structure algorithm where if you just want to see black folks, you can do that. And there's black folks building that. So it's very much like a build your own app type of community. But what was amazing is that I love people who are like fans of the tribe. Somebody had already saved the tribe's handle on Blue Sky, just was waiting for us to come over there. And then so once we got there, they were like, "Oh, welcome. We have your handle."
Wow.
And so we did a transfer and the community was so welcoming and they were like, "Let us teach you how this works." And then Blue Sky has something called starter packs where you can make these lists of people and groups to follow. So we got added to so many independent journalism lists and like Black folks to watch lists and listen to Black women lists. So people who wanted to find us could easily find us. And we've recouped almost our entire audience since that transition from X.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love it is I'm also learning about it. I think you're right. It is open and decentralized. Like you can download parts of the protocol and like even adapt it to something else, but I imagine that also makes it super transparent for people who understand programming to understand how it all works. There will be an interview with Rudy Fraser of Black Sky on this podcast by the time it's released. So if you're listening and you're interested in Blue Sky and Black Sky, look out for that. But I think that what you're talking about is a platform that's really trying to center the user and really guide the user to find the information that they want, not the information that's going to make the platform necessarily the most money. Because I don't know how Blue Sky makes money, but I haven't seen even any ads on it. So it seems like it's kind of a nice, at least for now, non-commercial, information heavy space. Um, I'm curious then, you know, in your role at the tribe, in your film work, on social media, what are the practices, the protocols, the types of platforms that you think motivate people to share stories and knowledge in the fracturing media landscape? You know, I know that you within Tribe, you have a diverse group of writers. You know, how do you work with your writers to make sure they're sharing the information that you think is going to be the most valuable to your communities? You know, when you're making a film, what are the values that you bring to this work? What are the practices and protocols?
Oh, let me think about that for a second. Well, I'll talk about the practices and protocols that we're trying to build currently because social media now has become an enemy, really, uh, because it's a space where information can just flourish unchecked. And we've seen
But
there be a divestment and an intentional erasure of Black voices and platforms from these social media tech giants. And we've seen just like Meta getting rid of fact checking. things like that, allowing hate speech. So what protocols can we have? Honestly, to me, I think that this battle has kind of already been lost because we don't own the platforms. Like it's very simple as that. Same thing with mainstream media, TV news. Um, there's no way to beat a platform you don't own. So that's why we just moved completely to, well, not completely. We try to use these spaces in ways that are useful to us. We understand that they are like community building spaces. So Instagram, for instance, like we have such a dedicated following on Instagram. There are people who tell us that if we don't post it on Instagram, they don't see it. We are the news source. so so we take that very seriously. So as long as the community is saying, please stay, we will stay. But in terms of our practices, we're trying to really just develop mechanisms for fighting misinformation, which for us is civic engagement education. Like there's no way we can combat every single lie that's being told, but we can just teach people about history. We could teach people about the government and how the government works. We can teach people how to read. Like, what should they be looking for when they're reading certain articles? And that's why we're so transparent about our editorial philosophy, because we want our our staff reporters to understand that there's a reason why they do the work that they do. And so they can teach their readers how to read them.
I love that. I love that. There's so much there about empowering your readers as opposed to treating them like consumers or products that you're trying to sell to. You're like, no, I want you to be empowered to maybe even challenge us in the future.
Oh,
Like we're not holding to our values. We've educated you so that you are actually able to speak back.
mm-hmm.
You're not afraid. I also love, it seems like there's something there, like when you said civic education, there is a vision of your online audience where you understand that this is like a group of people that exist in space. Like I remember back in the day, you had like these pop-ups in Chicago, and there was this way that like we're in it with y'all, like we're
Those
actually.
are coming back. Like that got disrupted because of COVID, but it's something that we miss, and we're like, we need that. Like we need to literally just like divorce people from their devices for a couple of hours, because I think it's become addictive. And we forget that, like, oh, we can actually move around in the world and we can change things. And actually, like, we like each other. There's so much bickering and fighting on the internet when it's just like, these are people who, if you were around them in real life, you could probably find some kind of common ground. So I think that social media has kind of exacerbated this like polarization of narratives, and hasn't left a lot of space for nuance. And I think that us moving to our newsletter with that transparency storytelling model and like moving back to in-person events is really, really important to kind of like restoring some of that balance and bringing back narratives that aren't such doom and despair.
Yeah, like I want to ask you about that because I think, it's been a while, but what I recall from those events is that they were spaces where it wasn't like a space where like a journalism space. Like when you walked in, you didn't think, oh, I'm at like a news organization's event, like
Right.
you had like a cool kind of lounge and there'd be like mood lighting and stuff. And so I'm curious, like, are you thinking about various kinds of what I'm calling cultural protocols or ancestral practices or rituals? I think about like the cookout as a Black ritual, for instance. Like, are there guiding principles for how you want to bring people together in space that you can't do or it's harder to do online?
Absolutely. That's always been a part of the Black abolitionist press tradition, the idea of like the soapbox, like come gather around everybody. Let's have a
Mm.
conversation, or I have a speech, I have something to say, or let's just sit around. And you know what? I've been reading, I just finished Cicely Tyson's autobiography. And just the idea that Cicely Tyson was living down the street from Diane Carroll and Harry Belafonte and like all of these people, and they would just get together and be at Miles Davis's house and just be talking and communing with each other. And we're seeing Black arts movements coming out of that, you know. Um, I think that's really important, just like us getting together and seeing what we can create together. I think screen space is great, but there's something about um, being in community together and you know, playing some music, and then like the connections that we can make just from our surroundings, and you know, paying attention to our body, how our body feels in the space. um some of my favorite moments in Chicago is going to like OTV, well, they're not OTV parties, but Elijah's parties, you know, Elijah's parties, just like Beyonce parties where we party to Renaissance for several weekends in a row. There's something about that that's like liberating and has a storytelling element and taught me something. It taught me something about Chicago. So there's other ways to teach people and to tell stories that's not like writing something down and putting it on the internet. And so when we're losing this game of digital media because we don't own anything, like we have to change the arena. And I don't think there's anything stronger than community and like experiences and making people feel something.
Ashe, I really think that it's also just so important in this moment where, at the national level, at the federal level, there's just so much violence being perpetuated. And if we're not strong where we are, where our physical bodies are, if we don't feel secure in our immediate environment, we're not going to get very far as a society, you know? And I just think people have to like reorient their perspective. I think there's something about social media that gets everyone thinking globally, which is great in a lot of ways, but also the world's a big place and it makes you feel very small, like you don't have any power because you can't affect the world, most of us, in any moment, right? But you can make your neighbor's day a little bit better, and that's going to make you a lot safer and more secure than probably anything you'll shout on Twitter that day, you know? So I just love that you're bringing those back. I'm so excited. I'm going to be there. And looking forward to it. I want to end with just two very simple questions. Um, what is one specific thing, be it a design feature, a cultural practice, platform policy, that you love about social media, and one thing that you would change? And this could be about social media or other technologies like AI or anything else, any other kind of technology, but one specific thing, tech-wise, culture-wise, policy-wise, that you would change, and one thing that you think actually still works.
Yeah, I'm such like a business owner. I would change tech ownership. Like I just don't like that these rich white men run all of the media sources. It is detrimental. And it's also really hurt local media because of the way that they've monopolized advertising. So if there is a way where social media could succeed without harming news, like that would be great. But it seems like with the current model, it we're really competing rather than working together. So yeah, I would change the ownership and make it more of a partnership with the news, because these tech sites wouldn't exist if they didn't have stories to share. If there wasn't local media that pops up in the Google search or pops up in the TikTok stories that people are telling. Um, so that's one thing I would change. One thing that's working, you just mentioned it, but it was like the global connectivity.
Mm.
Um, I didn't think I could be more radicalized, but what happened with Palestine, um, seeing war crimes take place in real life, I don't think I understood what it really meant to be living in a global empire until I saw the impact of that on Palestinians in real time. So it just really changed my relationship with the world, changed my perspectives, changed my understanding of American media and propaganda.
Mm.
Um, So when you don't have to have uh, the media intercepting images and then putting it out there, and you can have a direct connection to Palestinians who are showing you their surroundings, there's like a level of connectivity there that I don't think we've ever experienced as a society, as a world. And that has been transformative. And so I'm so glad that those communities were finally seen. Um, yeah.
And yeah, there were for so many decades, the mainstream media really accepted the federal government's narrative about that place and those people. And I think, you know, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, Kamala didn't really understand that people who were online, young people who are online, were seeing one thing and then seeing the administration say the exact opposite. And the things that they were seeing that the administration was obfuscating were incredibly harmful and traumatizing. And to see your leaders not address the trauma that you are seeing and then therefore by proxy kind of experiencing again, how could you then expect me to get all excited
Yep.
about you?
I went back and started using platforms that I hadn't hadn't used in years. Like I went back to Snapchat because Snapchat has geotagging, right? So like you could zoom in on Gaza on a map in Snapchat and get real-time images from people there of their surroundings. So that was like, wow, I've never ever seen the world in this way. And that's pretty remarkable.
Yes, let's not lose the connections and the powerful collective power that we can access through social media, but a little transparency, a little support for the local, support for community organizations would be really nice to have online. And I think would make our culture a lot better. But it seems like no matter what, y'all gonna be doing what you're doing. You're gonna be here trying to serve us and make sure that we know what's going on in the city of Chicago and the world. So I just so appreciate the work that you do. I don't think people understand how hard it is to do what you do. And I just want to give you the utmost respect and props for doing it day in, day out.
Thank you. I'm so excited for the tribe. It feels like we're moving into a new era because so much of the work that we've done has been experimental. There hasn't been like a roadmap of how do you combat the media or the things that you've been taught. We had to really create and lean in on our instincts and listen to our audience, which we've largely been able to do through social media. So we are definitely a digital age publication, and it has its pros and it has its cons, but we were able to buy a website for $2.99 and start a publication that means something to people. And I think that's pretty amazing.
It sure is. Yeah. And for anyone who's made it to this part of the interview and you like this interview, I did speak to Tiffany Walden a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago on this channel. So you can hop over there and get another perspective on the tribe and learn all about what they're doing. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to chat. And I'll see you in the spring.
Thanks, Amar. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was nourishing and thoughtful. So I appreciate you.